Welcome to another AI pattern recognition deep dive.
Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we're stepping past the usual excitement about tech breakthroughs.
Yeah, moving beyond just the wow factor.
Exactly. We want to interrogate the shadow side.
Mm-hmm.
We're not just celebrating how fast things are moving. We're diving into the deep contradictions, the paradoxes that really define this era of ours.
Mm-hmm.
The topic is the paradox of progress. Navigating contradiction in the age of AI and automation. We've sifted through, well, quite a stack of sources, research papers, articles, technical reports,
Real mix, yeah.
and they all seem to converge on this one insight,
Mm.
the very things that make AI and automation so incredibly powerful. They also introduce these fundamental, often really counterintuitive vulnerabilities into society.
That's the core of it.
So our goal today is pretty clear. We're not trying to, solve logical puzzles here.
No, not like a math problem.
Right. We're aiming to diagnose the systemic weak points, right, at that intersection where technology and, well, humanity meet.
And if we zoom out a bit, the whole foundation for this is the idea of the paradox itself. In this context, a paradox isn't just, a quirky brain teaser.
Not just this statement is false.
Right, not just that. It's a persistent, really stubborn contradiction. It's between two elements that are deeply interconnected, interdependent, often reveals what some philosophers call a unity of opposites.
Okay, a unity of opposites.
They're like the friction points, the sticking points in the whole socio-technical system.
Socio-technical meaning tech and society woven together.
Exactly. And our sources make a compelling case, I think, that these systemic paradoxes are actively eroding, well, three crucial things. Things we need for a functional, free society.
Okay, what are they?
Human agency, our ability to act independently, our capacity for critical thinking, and maybe most unsettlingly, our very sense of a shared reality.
Wow. Okay.
They're kind of slow, subtle threats, not always obvious up front.
That claim about eroding shared reality, that sounds really serious.
Yeah.
How does losing agency, for instance, chip away at what we consider to be true?
Well, it happens subtly. When convenience starts to override the effort of seeking truth, we start relying on systems we don't fully grasp.
The black boxes.
Exactly. And that reliance means we question less. So to understand this erosion, we've sort of broken down the source material into three main pillars, three key paradoxes that illustrate these vulnerabilities.
Okay, lay them out for us.
First, there's the paradox of automation. This one asks that counterintuitive question: why does the human actually become more critical as the system gets more automated?
Seems backwards.
Second, the privacy paradox. This digs into that gap between what we say we value about our data privacy.
Bank clicking, agree anyway?
Precisely, what our actual online behavior reveals. And third, the control paradox. This one's multifaceted, really deals with systemic failures around trust, explainability, and accountability in these super complex, often opaque AI systems.
Okay, let's really unpack this core concept first. Paradox, before we apply it to the messy reality of AI today. Let's get formal. What is a paradox, technically speaking?
Well, at its absolute core, a paradox is a statement or a proposition that's logically self-contradictory.
Okay.
It's something that, even if you use apparently valid reasoning, based on premises you think are true, it leads you to a conclusion that seems illogical or just fundamentally unacceptable.
So it breaks our expectations of logic.
Exactly. And historically, thinkers used paradoxes almost like a surgical tool to challenge really fundamental assumptions about the world. They show you where the basic rules, the axioms we rely on, start to break down.
Makes sense.
Think about the classic examples. Zeno's paradoxes, for instance. They challenge the very idea of motion itself.
Achilles and the tortoise, right?
That's the one. The idea that Achilles can technically never overtake the tortoise if it has a head start. Because, well, Achilles has to reach where the tortoise was, but in that time, the tortoise has moved on a bit.
So the distance keeps halving infinitely.
Infinitely.
Yeah.
It forces you to really grapple with concepts like the continuity of time and space. It feels wrong, but the logic seems sound.
Or the ship of Theseus. That's always been a mind bender for me. If you replace every single plank, every nail on a ship over time, is it still the same ship?
Right. And when you apply that to personal identity, it gets really complex. But maybe the most famous, the one everyone knows, is the liar's paradox.
This statement is false. Simple but impossible.
Exactly. If it's true, then it must be false based on what it says. But But if it's false, then what it says, this statement is false, is untrue, meaning the statement must be true.
Oh, my brain.
It's a perfect loop. It violates the law of non-contradiction. Your mind just freezes. And the barber paradox is similar, Does the barber who shaves only those who don't shave themselves shave himself?
If he does, he violates the rule. If he doesn't, he should be shaved by the barber himself. Another loop.
Precisely.
Now, these classic logic puzzles, especially something like Russell's paradox in math, that actually showed real foundational flaws in set theory, didn't it? And it forced mathematicians to fix things, create new rules.
It did. It led to necessary theoretical corrections, new axioms. They had to refine the very language of mathematics.
But it seems like breaking math theory is one thing. Breaking society is, well, another level entirely. Which brings us back to technology today. How do these paradox concepts apply now?
That's the crucial distinction, I think. Russell's paradox forced an internal fix within mathematics. They corrected the foundations of set theory.
Right.
But these paradoxes of AI automation, privacy, control, they don't necessarily demand we rewrite the code itself. I mean, sometimes maybe, but fundamentally.
It's bigger than the code.
Yes. They demand we rewrite the socio-technical system the code lives in. They're manifestations of this incredibly complex, often unforeseen interplay between us humans and the machine systems we build.
Okay, so it's about the interaction.
Exactly. They reveal these deep, persistent vulnerabilities, not just in the software, but in our structures for work, for ethics, for regulation, for control. The fact that these contradictions stick around even as the tech gets more sophisticated.
That tells us something's wrong.
It signals that our current societal assumptions about progress, about control, about human competence even, are fundamentally inadequate for this new reality.
So the goal isn't necessarily to, eliminate the paradox.
Yeah.
Because the contradiction is inherent in that human-machine relationship.
That's what the sources argue, yeah. It's more about management.
Management, not elimination.
Precisely. The sources really advocate for a crucial shift in mindset here. We need to get away from simplistic either thinking.
Like either full automation or no automation.
Exactly. Or either total privacy or zero privacy.
Yeah.
That kind of binary approach just doesn't work. It's futile. We need to adopt a strategic both-hand mindset.
Both hand, meaning
Learning how to proactively manage the tension between these opposing forces. Because progress and vulnerability in this age seem to be inherently linked. They come as a package deal.
Okay, let's dive into that first big pillar then, the paradox of automation. Our gut feeling, our intuition, is probably that if a machine does 99.99% of the work,
The human becomes less important.
right, maybe even dispensable eventually. But the paradox flips that completely on its head. What's the core tension here?
The core tension is this. The more efficient, the more reliable, the more powerful an automated system becomes. The more critical the human operator's contribution becomes.
More critical. Sure.
Specifically during a system failure, or when something happens that the machine just wasn't programmed for, an anomaly. Automation reduces the need for constant human effort, sure, but it makes the human veto, that ability to step in correctly and swiftly, it makes that exponentially more valuable. More critical.
Okay, exponentially more valuable. We have this incredible, really stark example from the sources about the sheer financial stakes.
Yeah.
Can you walk us through the computer processor production line? What happens when just one tiny sensor fails there?
Yeah, this example really crystallizes the stakes perfectly. Imagine this. A fully automated production line for computer processors. It's built for incredible speed, pumping out maybe 2,400 chips every single minute.
Wow.
It's working flawlessly, humming along. Then a minor physical sensor fails. Maybe a tiny drill gets misaligned by just a fraction of a millimeter.
Doesn't sound like much.
No, but the system, it might not recognize this failure immediately. Its internal checks are looking at digital signals, maybe not the physical output error directly.
So it keeps going.
It keeps going, and it keeps multiplying that tiny error at an alarming rate. It could be ruining, say, 40 chips every single second.
40 chips a second.
Yeah. Now think about the financial loss. You've got the cost of the ruined materials, the silicon wafers, everything, plus the opportunity cost, the downtime, the lost production while you fix it.
It adds up fast.
The sources estimate it can exceed $528,000 per minute.
$500,000 every
Yeah.
60 seconds. Just vanished.
Exactly. And that instantaneous, catastrophic potential loss, it completely transforms the role of the human operator, the person who might spend 99% of their shift just watching dashboards, looking at green lights.
Suddenly becomes the most important person in the room.
They become the ultimate indispensable backstop. Their value isn't measured by how many widgets they handle per hour anymore. It's measured by their ability to spot that anomaly, diagnose it correctly, and intervene perfectly in that one potential catastrophic moment.
But that leads right into the danger zone of the paradox, doesn't it? What the sources call the vicious cycle of skill degradation.
It does, directly. Because that high-stakes intervention, it demands intense skill. It needs up-to-date knowledge, real situational awareness, razor-sharp focus.
You have to be ready.
You have to be ready. But
Yeah.
because the system is so efficient, so reliable,
Mm.
because it does everything right 99.9% of the time, the human spends the vast majority of their time just monitoring, doing low-stakes observation, maybe even just busy work to stay awake.
So they're not practicing the critical skill.
Exactly. It leads to skill atrophy. The very efficiency that makes the automation great is simultaneously eroding the precise, quick-thinking diagnostic skills, the intervention skills, needed for that rare emergency.
So we're building systems where failure is less likely, but way more disastrous when it happens.
And we're simultaneously making the human less capable of handling that disaster when it eventually occurs. It's a really dangerous feedback loop.
This is where that phrase comes in, right?
Yeah.
The smarter the machines get, the dumber we might get. It's cognitive offloading.
That's it, precisely. We're offloading the mental work, and like an unused muscle, our own competence diminishes in that area.
We see this in other fields too, don't we? The sources mentioned aviation.
Yes, absolutely. In aviation, the sources point out pilots have become so reliant on sophisticated autopilots and flight management systems.
The computers that fly the plane.
Right. That they're sometimes, a bit derogatorily, called the children of the magenta.
Magenta. Why magenta?
Magenta is typically the color of the program flight path line on the navigation display screens. They're following the magenta line.
Ah, okay. So they're managing the system, not always flying in the old sense.
Exactly. And this heavy reliance, the sources argue, degrades their manual flying skills, their stick and rudder skills. But maybe more importantly, it can erode their intuitive ability to diagnose subtle, complex, unforeseen system failures, things the automation might miss or misinterpret.
So if the automation fails unexpectedly,
The human has to take over manually, often under immense pressure. But their internal capacity, their raw, intuitive feel for the aircraft, their decision-making under duress, it might have atrophied from lack of regular use.
it's incredibly relatable, even in everyday life, like using GPS all the
It's
time.
a perfect example.
You rely on your phone's navigation constantly. Then one day the signal drops or the battery dies, and you suddenly realize you haven't actually processed basic street layouts or local landmarks consciously in years.
You haven't built that mental map.
Your spatial memory, which used to be maybe quite sharp, has been outsourced to a satellite. And that outsourcing, that convenience, has diminished your internal ability to navigate independently.
That loss of intuitive knowledge, subconscious processing, even embodied knowledge, that feel for something, is really key here. And this connects directly back to the AI's own black box problem.
How so?
Well, the most powerful AI is often a black box, right? It's so complex we can't fully trace the nonlinear path it took to reach a decision.
We don't know why it decided what it did.
Exactly. And by relying heavily on these systems we don't fully understand, we start to mirror that opacity internally. We risk losing our own intuitive subconscious black box of expertise.
So when the AI fails or gives a weird result,
We have to troubleshoot this complex, subtle problem, but potentially with a diminished internal capacity for diagnosis ourselves, because we haven't been exercising those mental muscles.
so this fundamentally reshapes the nature of work, doesn't it? The sources are clear. Labor is shifting away from doing specific tasks.
Towards managing or troubleshooting the systems that do the tasks. It's becoming more abstract, more about supervisory oversight.
What are the big societal implications of that shift?
Well, the human's value changes dramatically. It's not always about replacement, which is the common fear. Often it's about augmentation and transformation of roles.
Like the radiologist example.
Exactly. A radiologist isn't necessarily replaced by an AI that can read scans. The AI might handle the routine image interpretation, flagging potential issues, but the human radiologist then focuses on the higher level tasks.
Such as?
Diagnostic oversight, consulting on complex or ambiguous cases, confirming subtle findings the AI might miss, interacting with the patient, explaining results, skills that are really difficult to automate. Emotional intelligence, adaptability, high-level abstract reasoning.
That pressure to constantly upskill, to move towards those human skills, that's visible everywhere, isn't it? Even in jobs we might think of as simpler. The sources had a great example with the cashier role.
Yeah, that's a perfect tangible illustration. Think about the traditional cashier role. They executed the transaction, processed payment, counted change, bagged items, managed the flow.
Right. Very hands-on.
Now, in many places, especially with self-checkout spreading, their role transforms. They become a checkout assistance helper.
Okay, what does that entail?
They're no longer primarily executing the transaction themselves. They're mostly troubleshooting the automated system when it inevitably fails.
Like when the machine won't scan something?
Or rejects a coupon, or needs an age verification override, or the bagging scale goes haywire. They're managing the automation's exceptions.
The only time the system actually needs a human is when it messes up.
Exactly. It shows that automation disruption isn't always straightforward job loss. It's often a massive job redefinition, and that creates a huge skills gap. The technical proficiency workers had might not match the abstract troubleshooting competence the new economy demands.
All right, let's shift gears to the second major contradiction, the privacy paradox. This one feels, well, pretty familiar to most of us living in the digital age, right? It's the one that makes you feel a little bit guilty clicking agree on that 40-page terms of service document you definitely didn't read.
Oh, absolutely. This is probably the most well-documented, most widely recognized paradox. It's that phenomenon where individuals, in surveys, express really high concern for their privacy. They often rate it as a top ethical priority.
Privacy is very important to me.
Exactly. Yet, those same individuals readily, often eagerly, relinquish sensitive personal data for what seems like minimal benefit.
Like access to a free social media platform.
Or a small discount code, maybe $5 off. Or even just faster access to a website without a cookie banner hassle.
That contradiction, saying one thing, doing another, has fueled this huge debate, hasn't it?
Yeah.
About what people really value.
It really has. And the sources break down this legal and ethical debate into two main competing arguments about how we should interpret that behavior.
Okay, what are they?
So the first one is often called the behavior valuation argument. This perspective is frequently championed by, technology providers and platforms.
Makes sense.
It basically argues that actions speak louder than words. If people consistently and easily trade their data for small benefits, then they must not actually value privacy all that highly.
So the market is working. It's a fair exchange.
That's the argument. They see it as a fair market transaction, revealing true preferences. And therefore, they argue, we don't need significant regulation or market friction around data collection. It would just get in the way of what people apparently want.
Okay, that's one side. What's the counter-argument?
The counterpoint is the behavior distortion argument. This side contends that people's behavior in this context is not an accurate measure of their true preference. Why? Because that behavior is being systematically influenced, even manipulated.
Manipulated how?
They point to several factors: psychological vulnerabilities, cognitive overload, just being overwhelmed, and crucially, the widespread use of dark patterns in user interface design.
Dark patterns. Those are the sneaky design tricks, right?
Exactly. UI choices specifically designed to exploit human psychology and nudge or trick you into sharing more data than you might otherwise choose to. Can you give some examples?
Sure. Think of pre-checked boxes that automatically opt you into marketing emails or data sharing.
You have to actively uncheck it.
Right. Or confusingly worded opt-out menus that made it unclear what you're actually agreeing or disagreeing to. Or maybe making the decline all cookies button really small, gray, and hidden, while the accept all button is big, bright blue, and prominent, making the path of least resistance the one that gives away your data.
Precisely. And this taps directly into cognitive load. I mean, our sources cited estimates. If you were to genuinely read every single terms of service agreement, every privacy policy, every EULA you encounter in a typical year,
How long would that take?
you'd spend nearly 250 hours. That's like 6 full work weeks just reading legal fine print.
Nobody has time for that. It's impossible.
It's functionally impossible. The cognitive cost of trying to manage your privacy rationally online is astronomical. And that's why people just click agree. It's a rational response to an irrational burden.
Which means, maybe the paradox itself is kind of a flawed way to frame it. If the system is designed to make rational privacy management impossible.
Then using the resulting irrational behavior, clicking agree as justification for less regulation, seems, circular at best.
Yeah. And this brings us to something interesting the sources mentioned. The reverse privacy paradox. What's that about?
The reverse privacy paradox flips the traditional view. It identifies this counterintuitive gap where people might say they're dismissive about privacy.
Like the classic, I have nothing to hide argument.
Exactly that. They might claim that, but in their actual real-world offline behavior, they still practice consistent, often instinctive, privacy-protective actions.
Okay, like what?
Well, think about it. Someone might tell a survey they don't care about government surveillance. But if they were discussing sensitive personal health information with a friend in a crowded coffee shop,
They probably lower their voice. Look around.
instinctively. Or you might cover the PIN pad when using an ATM, even if you claim you're not worried about security. Privacy isn't just about data fields on a form, it's about boundary regulation. It's an instinctive, dynamic human process. It goes way beyond just clicking yes or no on a screen.
So that dismissive claim, the nothing to hide statement,
Mhm.
maybe it's not really reflecting their true ethical stance. Maybe it's more like an adaptation.
That's exactly what the sources suggest. It could be a form of adaptation, maybe even a kind of learned helplessness or fatalism. If protecting your privacy online feels like this vast, complex, and never-ending project,
Which it does.
in a world of what they call digital publicness, where everything feels exposed anyway, then maybe claiming indifference, saying, I have nothing to hide, becomes a psychological defense mechanism. You surrender to what feels inevitable.
And the system designers kind of exploit that feeling of futility.
Well, yes, they can create this illusion of choice. You feel empowered because you click some buttons, maybe toggled some settings, but you rarely stop to question the fundamental options that were never presented to you in the first place. The underlying data collection practices often remain unchanged.
And this whole mess feeds directly into the regulatory challenge, right? Because often regulations try to solve the paradox by giving individuals more controls.
Right. More granular controls like detailed cookie settings, menus, managed preferences.
Which sounds good in theory.
But if the core problem is systemic complexity and cognitive overload, if managing privacy is already an impossible, never-ending project, then adding more complexity, even in the name of control, doesn't really solve it. It can actually be a form of regulatory failure.
How so?
Because it keeps the burden, the legal responsibility, squarely on the individual. They're held responsible for managing a problem they're functionally and cognitively incapable of solving on their own. And meanwhile, the large-scale data harvesting continues, often unchecked, all under the guise of informed user consent and choice.
Okay, let's pivot to the third major paradox, the control paradox. This feels less about our individual choices and trade-offs and more about the internal workings, the systemic features of these advanced AI systems themselves.
That's right. This one really gets into the technology itself and how we interact with it at a deeper level.
And we're looking at four interconnected conflicts here, right? Trust, explainability, fairness, and alignment. Let's start with trust. Hashtag 4.1, the paradox of trust, verisimilitude paradox. So trust. I remember in the early days, AI often felt clunky, robotic. You didn't really trust it because it was obviously a machine.
Right. It made mistakes you could easily spot.
But now, especially these large language models, LLMs, the systems are so smooth, so
Yeah.
fluent. They sound so convincing that we tend to trust them almost implicitly, even when, as we know, they can just make stuff up, hallucinate. The sources call this the verisimilitude paradox.
Verisimilitude, the appearance of truth. And that's the absolute core tension here, fluency versus accuracy.
The better it sounds, the less we question it.
Research shows this pretty clearly. As these advanced LLMs get better at mimicking human language, understanding context, generating coherent, well-structured, even authoritative-sounding text, users find it progressively harder to spot the errors, the inaccuracies, the hallucinations.
So the very sophistication we admire is the problem.
In a way, yes, that increased sophistication, that smooth delivery, it directly leads to rising user trust, which, paradoxically, makes the model an incredibly effective high-velocity vehicle for spreading plausible-sounding but actually false or misleading information.
Because it's optimizing for sounding good, not necessarily for being right.
Exactly. It's often optimizing for conversation, for coherence, for plausibility, and that's not always the same thing as optimizing for factual veracity.
So the very feature we value most, that conversational ability, the confident tone, the neat bullet points it generates, that's the inherent vulnerability.
It taps right into our deeply ingrained human cognitive biases.
So.
Well, we're sort of wired to trust voices or texts that sound authoritative and confident. It's a mental shortcut.
Sure, seems reasonable.
And the AI's clean, well-organized, fluent response, it triggers those shortcuts. Plus, a confirmation bias kicks in hard. If the AI generates a plausible-sounding answer that aligns even vaguely with what we already believe or want to believe,
We stop scrutinizing. We accept it.
we often do. We've essentially built machines that are incredibly good at persuasive rhetoric, sometimes at the expense of verified truth.
This has huge implications, especially if these systems become the primary way people acquire knowledge. Doesn't it mean the whole job of education has to fundamentally change?
It absolutely does. The source material argues strongly for what they term the curatorial imperative.
The curatorial imperative, what does that mean?
It means the act of teaching has to shift. It can't just be about transmitting content knowledge anymore, facts and figures, because AI can generate that instantly, on demand.
So what should teaching focus on?
It needs to focus on curating the origins and intentions of knowledge. In an age where thought itself can be simulated so convincingly, we need to teach people how knowledge was produced, how to assess the quality of the inputs that went into the AI, how to understand the system's potential biases or motives.
So media literacy on steroids.
Kind of. It's about teaching critical thinking, skepticism, source triangulation, understanding the how and why behind information, not just memorizing the what. Those become the foundational skills. Hashtag 4.2, the paradox of explainability, the black box problem.
Okay, moving from trust to the next related issue, explainability. This is the infamous black box problem we touched on earlier. The core tension here, the sources say, is utility versus interpretability.
Exactly. And it's a major headache for accountability and risk management. The issue is that the most powerful, most effective AI systems we have today, particularly deep learning models.
One's driving breakthroughs in image recognition, language, etc.
Right. They make decisions using these massive, complex neural networks, billions of parameters, intricate layers. The decisions emerge from this complex interplay in ways that are often nonlinear and essentially uninterpretable, even by the engineers who designed and trained them.
So even the creators don't fully know why it does what it does.
Often, no, not in a step-by-step traceable way like traditional code. The paradox is simple but profound. The more capable the system is, the better its performance, the less we often understand about how or why it arrives at its outputs.
And yet we're increasingly using these opaque systems for really high-stakes decisions.
We are. Medical diagnoses, loan applications, hiring decisions, even determining bail recommendations in the justice system. We use them because, on average, their performance is often superior to average human judgment or simpler models.
But if the system is a black box, that creates this massive ethical and legal vacuum, doesn't it? A vacuum of responsibility.
It really does. How can you audit a system for hidden biases if you can't see the decision process? How do you assign legal blame or liability when something goes wrong if the reasoning is fundamentally invisible? How can you guarantee fairness?
It seems functionally possible.
In many cases, it currently is. Take the financial markets. Algorithmic trading, or black box trading, operates at speeds far beyond human capacity to monitor in real time.
High-frequency trading.
Right. And this opacity has been implicated in things like flash crashes, where markets plummet incredibly fast, wiping out billions in value in minutes, often for reasons that are disputed or sometimes just unknowable after the fact. The lack of human judgment and the inability to audit the algorithms in real time increases systemic market volatility.
And this tension is incredibly acute in the justice system, too. The sources highlighted the Compass algorithm.
Yes, Compass is a risk assessment tool used in some U.S. courts. It predicts the likelihood of a defendant reoffending, and it perfectly illustrates this conflict between statistical fairness on paper and potentially discriminatory outcomes in reality.
How does that paradox play out specifically with Compass?
Okay, so the system exhibits what's called statistical calibration. This means, for example, if a black defendant and a white defendant both receive the same risk score, say a 7,
Okay.
that score predicts roughly the same rate of actual recidivism for both groups. So, statistically, a 7 means the same thing for both. That sounds fair.
Yeah.
Neutral.
Yeah, on the surface it seems objective.
But the algorithm was trained on historical crime data, and that data reflects existing societal biases patterns in policing, arrests, and prosecution. The algorithm learns these patterns.
So it learns the existing biases.
It internalizes them. And consequently, while it might be calibrated, the system exhibits different error rates for different groups.
Different error rates, meaning...
Specifically, it predicts false positives for recidivism, meaning it incorrectly flags someone as high risk when they actually wouldn't reoffend at a much higher rate for black defendants than for white defendants.
Wow. So even with the same score, the chance of that score being wrong and wrongly predicting future crime is higher for one group.
Significantly higher, according to the analysis the sources cited. So the system is fair by one statistical measure, calibration, but deeply discriminatory in its real-world impact on individuals' lives, potentially leading to longer sentences or higher bail based on inaccurate risk assessments.
And because it's a deep learning network, a black box.
We can't easily pinpoint exactly why those differing error rates emerge or precisely how to fix them without potentially breaking the model's overall predictive accuracy. It's a massive challenge for fairness and accountability. Hashtag tag tag 4.3, the paradox of fairness.
That failure of explainability leads us straight into the next component, the paradox of fairness itself. Our common sense, our ethical intuition often suggests that AI should be perfectly objective, neutral, maybe even blind to demographics like race or gender to avoid bias.
Right, the ideal of the impartial machine.
But the tension here, the sources argue, is between that idea of neutrality and the need for contextual awareness.
And that pursuit of naive neutrality, that attempt to be blind, is often exactly where the harm comes from. It's paradoxical.
How so? Why does trying to be neutral backfire?
Because AI models learn from data. And the vast historical data sets we train them on are almost inevitably saturated with existing human biases and societal inequalities.
The data reflects our flawed past.
Exactly. So if the data reflects bias, the AI doesn't magically filter it out. It learns it. It operationalizes it. It often even amplifies it because it applies that bias consistently and at scale.
We have examples of this, right?
Plenty. The sources mention Amazon's experimental hiring algorithm from a few years back. It learned to downgrade resumes containing the word women's, like women's chess club captain, because it was trained primarily on historical data from a tech industry where men were dominant in technical roles.
So it learned that male was a predictor of success based on past hiring.
Essentially, yes. Or think about facial recognition systems. Many early systems notoriously had much higher error rates for individuals with darker skin tones.
Why is that?
Primarily because the data sets used to train them lacked diversity. They were overwhelmingly trained on images of lighter-skinned individuals, so the attempt at objective pattern recognition failed certain groups because the input data was biased.
So simply stripping out explicit demographic data, like telling the AI to ignore race or gender, that's not enough. The bias can still creep in.
It's often not enough, no. Bias can seep in through proxy variables.
Proxy variables, like what?
Things that are strongly correlated with the demographic you removed. For example, even if you remove race as a data point, other factors like home address, zip code, neighborhood income level, maybe even shopping habits or prior healthcare interactions.
Things that correlate strongly with race or socioeconomic status.
Exactly. Those can still allow the AI to effectively infer the demographic information and perpetuate systemic inequalities, even if it's technically blind to the explicit category.
So what's the solution then, if neutrality fails?
Well, the counterintuitive solution, as advocated quite strongly in our sources, is something called difference awareness.
Difference awareness.
Yes. The idea is that to achieve true fairness, to get equitable outcomes, the AI might actually need to be intentionally designed to treat different groups differently when appropriate.
Treat groups differently. That sounds wrong, ethically.
It challenges our intuition, right? But the argument is that it's necessary specifically to compensate for existing societal inequalities and historical biases reflected in the data. It's about corrective action, not just passive neutrality.
So that's the core paradox of fairness then.
That's it. To achieve genuine ethical fairness in outcomes, the AI might need to be deliberately biased, but biased in a corrective way. It forces us to question that simplistic ethical equation where neutrality automatically equals fairness. It's often not that simple. Hashtag tag tag 4.4. The paradox of alignment.
Okay, this brings us to the final piece of the control paradox, alignment. This is the big effort to try and program AI models with human values, make them behave ethically, instill virtue.
Right, the AI safety problem, making sure AI goals align with ours.
But there's a paradox here, too. The tension is described as virtue versus subversion. And this one sounds like the ultimate catch-22 for AI safety.
It really does feel like a catch-22. The paradox, stated simply, is this. The better we get at aligning AI models with human values, the more perfectly we make them good or benevolent. The easier we might inadvertently make it for adversaries to flip them, to realign them with opposing malicious values.
Wait, why would making it better aligned make it easier to corrupt? That seems completely backwards.
It does, but think about the mechanism. To know what is good, to consistently choose the virtuous path, The AI model needs to have a very clear, very detailed internal understanding or representation of what bad is.
It needs to recognize the difference to choose correctly.
Exactly. The process of alignment instills the sharp sense of ethical boundaries, of moral directionality within the model's internal configuration, its representation space. This sense of goodness, however, isn't some inherently protected magical property. It's a measurable, potentially manipulable feature of the model's parameters.
Okay, so it's a feature that can be targeted.
Precisely. This carefully constructed virtuous alignment can, potentially, be isolated and then inverted by malicious actors. And they might be able to do this using relatively simple techniques. Things like model tinkering or applying what are called steering vectors.
Steering vectors, what are those?
A steering vector is essentially a targeted input or a modification to the model's internal state. It's designed to nudge the model's behavior away from its programmed alignment, away from good, and towards a different, perhaps malicious goal.
So an adversary doesn't need to, rebuild the entire AI from scratch to make it evil?
No, not necessarily. They might just need to find the right lever, the right steering vector that effectively flips the model's embedded ethical compass.
It's like building a high-security vault. The detailed blueprints showing how to defend it also inadvertently show the best way to break in.
That's a pretty good analogy. If the model is strongly aligned, if it's made perfectly virtuous, its internal sense of right and wrong is likely very sharply defined, very distinct.
Which makes it easier to find and target.
Potentially, yes. Easier to isolate that virtue signal and then invert it. Adversaries can use techniques sometimes called jailbreak attacks, where they use carefully crafted prompts or interactions to pressure the model, to trick it or force it into adopting an evil persona or performing harmful actions, overriding its safety training.
The implication here is pretty chilling.
It is. It suggests that as we get closer and closer to achieving perfect alignment, as we approach zero misalignment, the model's susceptibility to deliberate corruption might actually increase.
The more virtuous the AI, the more easily it can be made vicious.
That's the paradox. And it strongly suggests that purely technical solutions focused only on improving the technical alignment process might be fundamentally insufficient for long-term safety. Because the problem isn't just technical. It's ultimately about intent, control, access, and ongoing human oversight.
Okay, wow. We've covered these three massive interlocking paradoxes: automation eroding skill, privacy eroding meaningful choice, and control eroding trust, accountability, and safety. When you put all these together, what's the ultimate compounding consequence? What happens when these forces work in tandem?
The combined effect, according to the sources, is something they term agency decay.
Agency decay.
Yeah. It's described as this silent, progressive phenomenon. It operates kind of like cognitive muscle atrophy.
Like if you stop using a muscle, it weakens.
Exactly. When we consistently delegate complex cognitive tasks to AI, whether that's spatial reasoning for navigation, critical thinking for research, ethical judgment, even just basic fact recall.
Things we used to do ourselves.
Right. The corresponding neural networks, the pathways in our own brains associated with those tasks, they receive less stimulation, they get less exercise.
And they gradually weaken.
They can, yes. It can weaken our ability to question assumptions effectively, to recognize the gaps in our own knowledge, to generate truly novel, intuitive solutions that aren't just variations on what the AI suggests. We're offloading the cognitive load, which feels great.
Efficient.
It feels more efficient. But in doing so, we risk diminishing our underlying capacity to function effectively without that tool. Our baseline competence might subtly degrade.
That is the deep irony of progress, isn't it? AI often creates this powerful illusion of enhanced agency.
Absolutely.
We feel more powerful because we can subtly do incredible things, instantly generate complex code, translate languages perfectly, write essays, navigate unfamiliar cities with ease.
The tools are amazing.
They are. But that very convenience, that effortless power, might be subtly diminishing our capacity for truly authentic, independent thought and choice. It could be leading us toward a state the sources called chosen blindness.
Chosen blindness.
Yeah, like we choose not to look inside the black box. We choose to ignore the complexity, the potential downsides, the erosion of our own skills, because the convenience the tool offers is just too high to refuse. We choose blindness for the sake of ease.
And that really gets to the crux of the crisis we're navigating. Since those simplistic either solutions are futile, we can't just, ban AI or stop technological progress.
Not realistic.
Not realistic at all. We have to embrace the contradiction. We have to use that both-hand mindset we talked about earlier. The challenge isn't resolution, it's ongoing management.
Managing the tension.
Exactly. And it means redefining the human role. We're not just machine operators anymore. Maybe we need to become, as the sources suggest, curators of truth or narrative ethicists.
What does that mean in practice?
It means intentionally engaging with the AI, not just passively accepting its outputs, questioning it, probing its reasoning where possible, cross-referencing, understanding its limitations, being the active critical layer.
Okay, so let's wrap this up by looking at the practical strategies.
Yeah.
What do the sources recommend for actually managing these persistent tensions? How do we build systems and societies that respect the paradoxes while maximizing human resilience and well-being?
We need robust, strategic frameworks, and they need to span across technology design, law and regulation, and education. It has to be multi-pronged.
Makes sense. What's first?
First, human-in-the-loop, HITL frameworks. This is crucial. For high-stakes decisions, think medicine, finance, justice, critical infrastructure, we absolutely must mandate meaningful human oversight.
So the AI assists, but a human makes the final call.
Essentially, yes, or at least has the capacity to intervene and override. It means designing systems that integrate human judgment rather than seeking to completely replace it. The EU AI Act, for example, moves in this direction. It requires strict human oversight for applications deemed high risk.
Okay, so keeping humans involved. What's next?
Second, to combat that black box problem and the trust paradox, we desperately need more explainable AI, XAI, and transparency.
Making the black box less black.
We need to invest heavily in developing and deploying techniques, things like feature importance analysis, LIME, Shapey, other model-agnostic methods that allow us to audit these complex models, to peek inside, even if imperfectly,
Why is that so important?
to check for hidden biases after they're built, to understand why a model made a particular prediction. This transparency is non-negotiable if we want to build societal trust, ensure accountability, and allow for meaningful challenges to AI decisions, especially when they impact people's lives and opportunities.
Right. Third point, regulation.
Yes. Third, given the speed of tech development and the potential for systemic harm, we need proactive and adaptive regulation. We can't afford to always be playing catch-up, waiting for a major crisis before we legislate.
What does proactive regulation look like?
It needs to be adaptive, meaning it can evolve as the technology does. It should be risk-based, focusing the strictest rules on the highest risk applications rather than a one-size-fits-all approach.
Okay.
And crucially, the sources suggest using tools like regulatory sandboxes.
Sandboxes, like a play area for AI.
Kind of. They're controlled environments where companies can test new, innovative AI systems with potentially relaxed regulatory requirements for a limited time under close supervision.
What's the benefit of that?
It allows regulators to learn about the technology and its risks in a contained way, and it allows innovation to proceed without being stifled by immediate, potentially overly broad bans based on fear of the unknown. It helps find that balance between progress and safety.
Okay, HITL, XAI, regulation. What's the final piece?
Finally, and maybe most fundamentally for the long term, we have to address agency decay through education. This goes back to the curatorial imperative in education.
Reforming how we teach and learn.
Yes, education needs a fundamental shift. If AI, especially LLMs, can handle basic content transmission and generation writing essays, summarizing texts, answering factual questions,
And what's left for humans to learn?
we need to focus intensely on the how and why of knowledge production. Teaching critical thinking, source evaluation, algorithmic literacy, understanding bias, discerning manipulation. We must train individuals to be critical consumers and critical creators of information in this new environment.
So teaching them to curate the AI's output, to scrutinize the black box, not just accept the answer.
Exactly. Training them to be the intelligent filter, the ethical guide, the context provider. That's the uniquely human value add that education needs to cultivate. #outro.
This deep dive really underscores it, doesn't it? This age of progress, it's not going to be defined just by how fast our technology adopts or how powerful it gets.
No, the defining factor will be different.
It seems like it'll be defined by how skillfully we manage these fundamental, inherent contradictions within the whole system. The challenge really is management, ongoing management, not finding some final neat resolution.
That's right. The goal isn't to eliminate the machine's influence. that ship has sailed. It's about being incredibly intentional about defining and then fiercely guarding those parts of our cognitive landscape, our decision-making, our ethical reasoning that absolutely must remain human. So if we accept this idea that our heavy reliance on AI can create that powerful illusion of enhanced agency.
While potentially leading to chosen blindness.
Right. If we accept that, it raises a really important, maybe uncomfortable question for you, the listener, to consider. Thinking about this idea of agency decay. What specific, complex cognitive tasks, maybe that capacity for deep critical thought, subconscious intuition, that embodied feel for something, what tasks must you absolutely refuse to fully offload to technology today?
What do you need to keep practicing yourself?
Exactly. What mental muscles do you need to keep exercising to maintain your own internal black box of expertise, your unique human agency? Answering that for yourself might be the most critical part of defining the human-machine partnership moving forward.
That is a truly provocative thought to end on. What do you refuse to offload? Something to definitely mull over.
Searching for answers to unanswered questions.
This is DigitView.